I'm Karen Goulekas, and you are listening to the Movie Raid Show.
It's time for the movie raid. Tonight's victim is visual effects artist Karen E. Goulekas, and has done many films such as True Lies, The Fifth Element, The Green Lantern, Titanic, and dozens of others. Hello.
How you doing?
Fantastic. So, is there any projects that you wish to share that people haven't we can check out right now?
God, funny enough, the last one I was working on, like, full-time was My Little Pony, and that was during COVID. And it's kind of a funny story, because I was on Wheel of Time in Prague, and then the borders got shut down for COVID, and I was packing to go home, and got a call to see if I was available to consult for a couple of months in Ireland on My Little Pony. I hadn't done a full CG show before, and I said, sure, as long as you can fly my cat and my husband over there with me. You know, they'd been over with me in Prague. Got there for a couple of months, and actually, thankfully, that turned into well over a year, because it was during COVID time. So we had a great time. We were in Europe during COVID. I worked out of Malta for a month when I had to leave and get my Irish visa, so that was a blast. And then when it got too cold and rainy in Dublin, went down to Portugal for 6 weeks and worked remotely from there. So actually, COVID was really good to us. I mean, I was going back to LA, and I was certain to be having, nothing to work on. So along comes this funny, cute little kids movie, and I know it was awesome. I mean, we got to be in Europe the whole time, and like I said, travel to those other places. So, and then I came home and I've consulted on a whole bunch of shows, but a lot of things just didn't get started because of COVID. It's been up and down, thinking, yeah, this is gonna go. No, it's not. So that's a lot of what I've been doing since I got back to the States. I'll come in really early before a show is greenlit and read script, do a visual effects breakdown. Either I'll budget or I'll send it out to visual effects vendors, and we're just trying to get some rough numbers for the studio, because they need obviously that information to figure out if can greenlight the show for the money they want to greenlight it for. So a lot of that stuff that I work on never does get greenlit. Good paychecks, and hopefully they hit once in a while.
Working with such big projects, as well as their distribution was equally just as large, achieving deadlines within, does it become less of artistry and more of the formality sometimes, or is it pretty much an equal balance sometimes?
I don't think there's any show where you don't feel up against it to get it delivered, because as long as you can keep going, shots can always be made better. The tendency is you'll keep trying to perfect stuff until the bitter end. So you get into situations every show where there's ones where you call them the clunkers, where it's like, oh God, we had the final out. It was the last night to get it over to DI. Always there's something that it's like, oh, you're not happy with. And you're definitely working long hours at the end, and everybody's scrambling, and everybody wants to make it look as good as they can. Usually I'm working on what we call production side. So I'm hired by the studio and the production to oversee all the visual effects, and then it's my responsibility to hire the visual effects houses that have all the visual effects artists and software and all that good stuff to create it. And they want it to look just as good as we do, because their name's on it. So we're all just fighting till the end to make it as good as possible.
When there is problems, and there's always problems with every project regardless of what you do, but when you are overseeing or being involved within that product, do you sometimes like ground control, like if there are actual problems with either a character or design or something related to that, like especially if you got a large staff to work with, like how would you really coordinate that? Is that really the most toughest part, is the coordination of that?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a long time ago, as good as any one company can be, it's really about the timing, right? Like I can have an excellent experience because I got all the A-listers on a company X on Project Y, and it goes really smoothly. Other times, though, the companies are getting slammed. Every project wants to add more work onto them, and then that can mean you end up with fewer artists, fewer iterations. So I learned a long time ago to break the work up. I haven't worked with just one vendor in years, and the reasoning behind that is because shit happens. They could be starting out gangbusters, but either they have trouble hitting something because they're hitting other deadlines, or whatever the reason, they underbid it and they start losing money, and you feel like, we're not getting as many iterations. The point is, by having multiple vendors, you see early on where the trouble spots are, and you can move work around. You've now got a lot of, multiple people in play. It just comes, I get a gut instinct, like, oh, this isn't going as quick. Maybe what if we move this here? We'll give them this work, but we'll put that work over here. And so it's a big chess game, to be honest. And you spot the problems pretty early, because it's during shooting, or even prep a lot of the time, pre-production phase. We're starting to do previs and asset builds, as we call them then, and that's when we're actually creating the CG environments and characters directors and all that. And so you're building all that stuff with the idea that it's ready to go when the plates start coming in post, and we do the edit and we start turning it over. So if you've done your work right, you know early on if it's working out with a particular look of an effect or a vendor or anything else. I mean, sometimes you just get a director that changes his mind all the time. It's not always the vendor, but whatever it is, you find out relatively early, oftentimes before you're even shooting, you know that you have to make changes.
And working with a subjective vision, do you feel that an objective vision can also be too powering over that subject or even multiple subjects despite how well it's being placed?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if you're doing an environment extension, set extension, or a stunt double, a digital double, or anything that has to look photoreal. Pretty much it looks right or wrong, right? I mean, we know what things should look like, and oftentimes with CG, you have practical set pieces or the real human that you're doing a digital stunt double of. You have them to compare to, like what it's supposed to look like. So that stuff is very easy. It either looks photoreal and matches the look of the practical human or the practical set, or it doesn't, and you need to keep working on it. The times when it gets tricky is, when you're doing like the fantastical stuff and you're doing particle effects and magic and energy and fairy dust and all this ethereal stuff. There's no right or wrong. It comes down to vision of the director and the input of myself and the producers and just all of us looking at it on what we think works. To me, that's usually the most difficult stuff, and that's the stuff I'm usually anxious to start as soon as possible in look development. Again, even before we're shooting, a lot of times I'll ask the director of photography to shoot some test plates so that we can start messing around, because some of this stuff can take a really long time, not because it's so complex, but because you start out with one thought and it's like, oh God, that doesn't really work, and it would be better if this or that, and then the vendors are coming up, they're collaborating with you, and they have an idea, and that's what makes it take longer. Because when you look at the end result, if you told someone we worked on that for 6 months, you'd be like, why? It's not that complex. It's because of the creative process to get there.
There's always that judgment too, especially when the audience are looking at this and like, oh, that looks terrible, and you spent all this time, effort, energy, and it's been approved, but and even though maybe some of that judgment was even reflected against the people that are working on it, it still had to be approved by studios and so forth because a lot of money's been injected into this. But then the audience is like, this is terrible, why does it do this? And do you feel like some of these companies, like, even though they know this is happening, it's really about how much business they're generating? Like, it's not really so much as what they're putting into there, even though it doesn't look as good, but it's doable, as according to them.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that things wouldn't look good, and I'm talking like in the 90s and early 2000s, because the technology wasn't always there. So we had to spend so much of our time on brute force and technical fixes and less on creative iterations. But in current days, I'd say sometimes it's just that, honestly, maybe you picked the wrong vendor there, that wasn't their strength. Or you didn't get the A-team because they got a ton of money dumped on them by another show that had more money, and so you didn't necessarily get the best artist. Or maybe it's, like I said, maybe it's a director who's changing his mind on you all the time, and so you start running out of time. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why stuff ends up on screen that at the end of the day you're not happy with. It can be a combination of all those things. Wrong vendor, not enough money, director changes his mind, or studio. It might, if it's a director that doesn't have final cut, then you've got very heavy studio input. I mean, you still have studio input even if the director has final cut, but there can be a difference of opinions between the studio and the production team. I mean, there's a million reasons why it happens, and then you run out of time. You've now shortened your look development time because you've been going in circles chasing stuff, and you just couldn't get there in that window that was left. Sometimes it's like they just recut it and they add a new scene, and it's like, we want to do this, but it's really late in the game, so again, you're rushed to get it done. Yeah, nobody likes it, but unfortunately it happens. You don't always get that nice ramp up time to say, okay, we got 4 months to figure out the look dev in this, and then we'll start getting shots a month after that, and we'll start banging them out and getting lots of finals, and it'll look beautiful. We all wish it went that way on everything, but sometimes it doesn't.
Do you feel there's a defining line difference between cooperative and collaborative?
Yes. My favorite kind of vendor, one in which we'll say, give a shot, I send back the note, and I'll say, do X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's make this bluer, boom up about 10 seconds earlier, pan to the right. Cooperative vendor that's able to just follow the note. But the collaborative vendor which is my favorite, is going to follow those directions to a T. But in doing it, they look at it when it's done and they go, this still doesn't feel quite right. It would probably be better if we did X, Y, and Z a little differently. And so they do what they think would make the shot look better, and they present you with both versions. And that's the ideal. Like, here's the one you asked for, but we looked at it and it's good, but we thought we could make it a little better if we did this. And 9 times out of 10, the one that they propose is the better one because they've been sitting there staring at the shot all day. The one I don't like is if you ask them to do X, Y, and Z, they decide they don't really like it, and then they just send you their version. And I'm like, no, I got to show the director the version he'd asked for, even if it doesn't look right, But that's, I'd say, the difference between cooperative and collaboration. There's 2 times when it can get uncomfortable. One is if the company itself just isn't hitting photoreal, and you start going in circles like, guys, this doesn't look like the practical set, and they're going around and around. They're like, we think it looks good. We're like, well, it doesn't look photoreal. Or conversely, the director is changing his mind. The vendor is doing what's been asked. It's okay for the director to say part of the creative process, as long as we're compensating them if we change gears on them. But sometimes it just goes on, and they start to get frustrated because they can't nail the look, and it's not because they're doing anything wrong. So, I mean, it can hit from either side. And it gets frustrating because at the end of the day, the company is trying to, at a minimum, break even on money, and we're trying not to pay a ton more money because we keep changing our mind. And then you've still got deadlines, the time frame over your head. You get tense, you can get like, oh shit, how are we ever going to hit this? You have days where you think, oh my God, we're never going to make it. And I don't know, somehow you always do. But like I said, sometimes you have clunkers in there, as we call them. But hopefully on most shows you're really happy with 99% of it.
The production value of a high budget film, especially a high budget film, crucial when distributing and the presentation. But how does the value stay worthy for that visual artist as well, especially when it's consistent? Like when that comes a huge key for yourself, like how does that stay within value? How do you stay relevant within this profession even after this project or projects are done? How do you keep moving forward from what you've done and still be known for that and still be worthy of what you do?
Well, a lot of times it's just like everybody in this industry, you're usually recognized for what your latest work. I mean, you're still recognized for your old work, but that's the reason everybody fights so hard that you want to make sure the work looks good, because it's your most recent work that's going to get recognized and likely get you picked up on your next project. And if your latest project doesn't look good, it's like, oh shit.
There's that time where at some point you're going to run out of work, and it may take a while before, even though you have a very large resume prep, that like, how would you keep that in motion? At some point, do you have to accept that regardless, even though in this industry, to the point where you can't really have a life for yourself, but even though you enjoy it, it's almost like a double-edged sword. Like, you have to keep going, but do you feel like you yourself have to stay within this, or do you think like, oh, I'm okay, I can always be involved with something else because I've done this?
When I was younger, I mean, it was like working nonstop, and I needed to pay bills and to build the career. As I've gotten older, when I'm in between, because I'm freelance, I mean, I think I've only ever been on staff at a facility like 4 years of my career, or 5 years. So I've always been a free agent, and with that comes gaps of time where you're not working. You interview, they say, hey, you're in the final 2, and you end up being the one that's the bridesmaid. I'm just so used to that now. And so I don't stress about it anymore. I travel. I mean, my husband and I just came back from Buenos Aires, and before that, we were there for about 3 weeks. Before that, we were in Costa Rica for 3 weeks. I look at it now as take advantage of that time, because when I haven't in the past, and I've said, oh, I better keep looking for work, and let's not spend the money. I get a job that's now on book for the next 2 years, and I'm like, shit, why didn't we go to Costa Rica when we had the chance? Now it's another 2 years. Yeah, much more relaxed about it. I can send all the emails in the world or calls and let people know I'm available. But honestly, the way I get a job is someone reaches out and says, are you available for X? They call you, they email you. And so again, I'm just like, I'm not going to spend my time off sending a million emails letting people know I'm available. I mean, if they have something and they're looking for a supervisor, they're going to reach out to the people they're interested in. It's just the mindset of being a freelancer. And of course, having worked more years, save up more money, so you can relax more in between projects. and just enjoy yourself.
Now, does being freelancing, does that actually work within a lot of the areas? It does work with some people, and sometimes it don't. Sometimes they have to keep making that money, Sometimes it's not good, but in other cases it can be good. But does that just really depend on how can you actually manage that? Is that, especially a lot of artists that are going around today within this industry, do you think that's really the better option is to be freelance than to be attached to something?
I think so, but that's my personal mindset. A lot of people, they want to have the health benefits, the secure paycheck. But, I knew when I was an artist, the way to move up was to move companies. Yeah, if I'm asking the company I'm working at, can I have a raise? They're likely like, no, we can't do raises now. But another company is looking for artists, and I go there and I say, this is what I want. I've just given myself a raise, and if they're busy and need people, then they bring you on. And then inevitably, if I'm on staff somewhere, there's some other project that comes up that I want to do instead. I'm kind of like grass is always greener, so I've definitely meant to be freelance. But a lot of people don't like the insecurity of that. But for me, it's much more preferable. And honestly, as a department head on a production, you're all freelance, right? They hire a costume designer. You're just hired for the project, the stunt coordinator, visual effects suit, DP. We're all just freelancers. It's in the facilities that they'll have some staff positions, but even those are getting fewer, where they don't want to pay health and stuff. They just have a few core people, and you just get hired per project, and then you're free again to move on, which I think makes sense. So yeah, being staffed isn't even an option in what I do now as a visual effects supervisor.
Go ahead and plug in any websites or any advice that you'd like to care to add to the audience, or anything else that you'd like to add with that.
Yeah, if I were starting out now as a digital artist, use it to travel the world. When I was a digital artist, I started back in 1984. I was on one of the first computers that came out then, and it was pretty much the United States. It was New York. I was freelancing in commercials and logos, and then I came out to California, joined Jim Cameron's company. I was artist number 10 there, Digital Domain, which was an awesome experience in 93, I think. But I didn't have the option to travel the world as an artist. If you're a digital artist now, man, go work in France and, Italy and everywhere. Take advantage of it. I got to work as a visual effects supervisor. I've been now to 46 countries, I think. Some of it travel, most of it work. Not only do you have a creative and exciting career, but you also get to travel the world and see how other cultures live. I think it's the greatest, especially the ones that are single and not tied down with kids and mortgage yet. Man, work in other countries and take advantage of it.
And there you have it, everybody. That is visual effects artist Karen Goulekas.